Hey, everybody, it's Chasta Baby Huey for 1077 The Bone. On the line with our new friend we met last year at Aftershock, Mr. Tim Montana. How are you, sir?
Better than I deserve. Thanks for having me.
I love that. We were just chitty-chatty. Where in the world are you?
We're
Instead of
in
where it's
Mesa,
from San Diego.
Mesa, Arizona.
Mesa. Okay. So we talked to Myles Kennedy. What was that? Tuesday, I think it was.
Yeah.
And you were in Kansas City, if I remember right.
Yeah, that's
So
funny because they were like, "Be quiet, Miles is on the interview." If I would have known it was you guys, I would have just jumped on the couch next to you.
you totally could have. That would have been great. You know, it's funny. We said this to Myles the other day. We've known Myles for 15 years, very long time, and we've always said that he's like the nicest rock star. That anybody that asks us, like, who's the best rock star that you met? Right. But it's funny when we met you at Aftershock, we were like, Tim Montana's like he's like Myles. He's like the nicest guy. And then when you guys like connected, we were like, of course, this makes so much sense.
The nice guy tour. I'm like, I gotta really fix my image and do something crazy.
Well, you're crazy, and we'll get into that.
We'll get into that. However, if you want to see the Nice Guy tour, that is coming to Sacramento at the Ace of Spades next Tuesday, February 18th. It'll be Myles Kennedy and Tim Montana. Amazing combo right there. So get your tickets right now over at livenation.com. So yeah, Tim, how's the tour going so far? I know you guys got some snowstorm issues earlier in the week.
Yeah, man, the first week was rough. It was like 10 below zero. I got food poisoning at a casino in Michigan. I was dying. It was terrible. And then I was like, I feel like I've been out here for 2 years, even though it's been 2 weeks. And now I'm like, it's coming to an end. I'm like, I don't want to go home.
Oh, I love that. That's great. What did you take for your tummy, and how did you push through to perform like that?
You know, it was really rough. I just took a bunch of Pepto-Bismol, and I felt bad because I went to a meet and greet. I got through the show. I like, I talk about everything on stage. I'm like, hey, guys, I got food poisoning. I ate some bad shrimp at a casino. And I'm not an idiot. It wasn't like some gross casino. It was a very high-end casino in Michigan. And I got a shrimp boil. You'd assume boiled shrimp, you're good to go. It's not like I got sushi at a truck stop. It's not my first rodeo.
Right.
And I made it through the set. It was like ghost white pale and sweating. And then I went to the meet and greet, and some guy said, huge fan. And I said, give me a second. Swung the door open. Started losing my guts, right? And the security guard thought I was a drunk guy. So he comes up to me and he goes, you are cut off. You're 86. And he's like yelling all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm the singer.
I got the runs, or leave me alone.
Yeah, right. Exactly. You're like, don't get in my way. It's coming out both ends. You poor thing. That's awful.
Yeah, we survived, though. We survived Michigan. That was in Flint, Michigan that happened. It was terrible.
Damn you, Flint. I have to watch my mouth. Your daughter's sitting next to you, so I'm going to be careful. I'm going to be a good girl
like
today.
Sailor. She's very,
I love that. Auntie Chasta will watch her mouth today. Yeah. That's so cute. Well, it's funny because like I'm a little ashamed, if I'm being honest with you, Tim. I'm a little ashamed that we didn't know you prior to like 2 or 3 years ago, because you've been busting your butt since like 2007. And whenever we dug into you, when we, started playing you on the Bone, we were like, this guy's been around. Like, where's he been? Because you felt like to us an overnight success, right? It's always like that, a 20-year overnight success. So I have to ask you, like, what was the moment in your career where you were like, oh, my rocket's about to take off? Like, this is the moment. Like, you were on David Letterman way back in 2007, but when did it take off for you?
I had a ton of them. Like, in those little moments, I think kept me dreaming, if you will. Like, getting David Letterman early on in my career. I didn't have a manager. I didn't have a publisher. I didn't have a record company. That gave me a taste, and I've been chasing the dragon ever since. Playing the Ed Sullivan Theater at 23 was wild. Yeah. And I went and did another record, and that record flopped. And I was like, damn. But then I'd meet Dave Grohl's on the way, and then Billy Gibbons came into my life, and I'm singing the theme song for the Boston Red Sox, and I'm like, how did this happen? I don't even watch sports.
That's it. That's so crazy.
So I always tell people I kind of did my career backwards, and I don't think as an artist there's ever a moment where I've been like, oh, I did it, because you always want to do more. You always want to write a better song and come up with a better guitar lick, and I think that's what keeps it exciting. There's never even like hanging out with guys like Billy Gibbons, who's clearly made it. I think he's still chasing that, like, what's the next song, what's the next tour, what's the next riff, like, how do we keep it going? and he's 75
Yeah.
and still chasing it. So.
Oh, man, I absolutely love that, though. That makes me so happy. Huey has made mention before that he feels like, and I'm going to let you finish on this one, Huey, but I love the Forrest Gump reference. Tim Montana is like the Forrest Gump of rock with all the people that you've met and all the things that you have done. Have you?
Okay.
I've played golf with the president. No, I haven't, but I do feel like
well, the crazy thing, Tim, is, for anyone who follows you on Instagram, you can see just a lot of cool throwback photos. Case in point, the other day you posted a photo with the guys from Nirvana. I mean, of course, Dave Grohl, Chris Novoselic, and even Jamie Kennedy. That was interesting. But
I didn't know for 2 years that was Jamie Kennedy, by the way. Someone's like, you know who that is in the background? I'm like, no way. I think I was a little too soft up. A little too enamored with Nirvana.
Yeah, but then you met Billy Gibbons and eventually led to his tour with ZZ Top, Charlie Sheen. I mean, all these different scenarios that you've gotten yourself into and met with, bands you toured with. How did this be? How did you become the Forrest Gump of rock and roll?
I have no idea. People always ask me how. I'm like, I don't know. Just show up.
Yeah.
I always tell people do cool shit.
Yeah. You know what I think? I think it's a two-part answer on your behalf. I'm going to answer for you. Number one, I think it's because you're a very genuine soul. You're very authentic. You have a very high vibration. Like when we met you immediately, I felt like I'd known you my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And people really connect to that.
I've never met a stranger. I know that every time.
Exactly. But that's because, you stay open to people and you stay open to experiences. But also, I have a feeling you did your fair share of partying maybe when you lived in LA. So, that helps. That helps. Yeah. It helps open those doors and have fun conversations. In fact, I have to ask you, because if you see, I don't know if you can tell, but that's a picture of Janis Joplin behind me. She's always over my shoulder.
Oh, wow.
She's my queen, my goddess. And I used to live 2 blocks away from the place that she died, the hotel she died.
I lived in the room.
I'm dying. Please tell me everything. I always wanted, I was too broke. I always wanted to just stay there one night, but I could never afford it because I was living in Hollywood 2 blocks from there and was broke as hell. Tell me.
Yeah, so my brother bought me 2 months. He's like, I was really poor, so he's like, I'll pay for 2 months in a hotel until you can find. And I split it with the guy. And I think it's the Franklin Heights Hotel, isn't it?
Uh-huh. Yep.
Yeah, so they put me in the dang room. And we lived there for 2 months. And it was pretty wild. That was my introduction to Hollywood, was that. And then after, I was partying a lot of that. Not really going to school. But then I moved 2 blocks down the street to Sycamore Terrace on Sycamore in Hollywood, right behind the Chinese Theater. And then I lived there for a couple of years. And that was the same apartment that Guns N' Roses used to live in.
Yep.
And I would go down to Hollywood Liquors and negotiate underage alcohol purchases with Jim and Jose. With Jose? And we became buddies, and I'd always tell them, I'm going to be a rock star someday. And they're like, actually, we believe it, because you have the same energy that this guy named Axl Rose had.
Oh, my God. That is incredible. Okay, not to get too personal here, but what is the timeline we're talking about here?
03 through 05.
We were neighbors. Tim,
really?
We were neighbors, and I used to go to that same liquor store. I lived on Cherokee, so Hollywood and Highland is right here, right? So Cherokee is a block off of that, and I used to walk down on Franklin, by those apartments, by Sycamore Terrace. I used to go to that liquor store. We were freaking neighbors, and I lived there from 03 to 06, I think.
No way. We had to have seen each other, because I was a terrible skateboarder, but I skateboarded up and down Hollywood Boulevard, and I was I was kind of a menace to society because that was my first time having electricity and freedom. So I was like, let's go.
Let's freaking go. I love that reference. You just so casually say that, but a lot of people who know your story know how you were raised and your trailer stories and your writing by candlelight stories. But I do love that you share that so openly. Mm-hmm. You've just always been that vulnerable. You don't have any problems just telling those stories and telling your truth.
Yeah, I'm very open. Sometimes it doesn't get me in trouble, but sometimes my band's like, can you not tell that story about?
Yeah.
I'll report the daily news of the tour. But I like to inspire people and to see kids in the crowd. It's had a rough go of life, and I'm like, life's been pretty easy considering 5 to 18 is so rough on me. So I like to try to inspire people, and I get messages all the time, and that's the cool thing about, as I'm out here, I'm kind of drawing these differences between the country southern rock world and the hard rock world. And I'm like, I've never had people when I was doing, my weed and whiskey and my little tongue in cheek kind of southern rock country stuff come up and say, "You saved my life." And now
Yeah.
I'm hearing it all the time online, in person, and I'm like, wow, this genre for me, complete honesty in my lyrics were before. And I was writing this stuff before, but I didn't have a lane. So it was like these songs were like, oh, would never work in Nashville and this and that. But now it's like in this hard rock space, you can be vulnerable and honest and say what you want in these songs. And it's the messages I get are crazy. So
Yeah.
Well, Tim, let's kind of touch on that more as far as Chaz and I were talking. It's like, what a year for you as far as you really exploded in the last year in the rock world. We saw the video you posted on Instagram recently. You were number 6 on rock radio in 2024. Congrats on that.
Yeah.
But also, you've been at this since, 03 after high school. So you've been like 20 years in the game, over 20 years, but it feels like you're an overnight sensation. But I think that's for a lot of people. What appears to be an overnight sensation, it's like 20 plus years in the making. For anyone who's followed your story, yeah, as you mentioned, you did like the country stuff and the southern rock stuff, but you really found success in more the hard rock world. What made you want to go through that change of genre into more hard rock? And it's really amazing the last year how much everyone's embraced you for it.
yeah, and that's kind of an interesting thing too. Is like I didn't have a lane in Nashville. I ended up from Hollywood. I moved right to Nashville, Tennessee, and everybody kind of geographically are like, "Oh, this guy's from Montana." So because I grew up the way I did, they kind of put me in the box of country, but it never worked out. And the songs that I had cut as a songwriter were coming from Kid Rock and Travis Tritt and guys like that that were edgy rock country. So it's funny that I'm writing the music I was writing when I was a teenager now, and it's working. But I don't think it was that those years in Nashville were in vain, because I really crafted, sharpened the sword on songwriting. I've written with some of the best songwriters. I mean, I remember sitting in the room with Chris Stapleton and Billy Gibbons for 3 hours just writing songs, being like, man, this is like a master class.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And the writers in Nashville are second to none. There's, nowhere on earth that has that many unbelievably talented poets that live there and it's been that way since the 50s. I don't think any of that was in vain. It just, I learned to write correctly, but then I kind of went back to subject matter of when I was a teenager, and I'm writing a lot of these songs about my teenage years when I was in the mountains cranking up grunge music.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, because I think for a lot of people, the thought back in the day was, okay, if you want to make it, you got to go to LA. And as we know, the history of like the 80s is very, everyone was fighting for their space to get noticed, to break through. And even so through the 90s. But I feel like a lot of people are now in Nashville. Is Nashville just as competitive now to live there? Because I feel like so many rock stars we know live in Nashville now, or at least in that area. Is it more competitive in Nashville now like it was like in the 80s for the LA music scene?
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of new people in rock, so I wouldn't say Nashville's people are fighting and competing for it. In the country space, sure.
Okay.
It's a big fight. Artists get into each other's ways. I don't know. I got out of there and I was kind of glad I did. I'm like, all right, I did 18 years. See ya. So I moved to Montana. Yeah, the rock thing is just kind of starting to come. But you had Kings of Leon 15 years ago that blew up out of Nashville, stuff like that. But there's not a ton of rock acts that have broke. I know Paramore's from there, Kings of Leon are from there. But now, like the guys from Seether moved there, Motley Crue's moved there.
Dave Mustaine lives out there too now.
Yeah, Dave Mustaine's there.
Yeah.
So a lot of these guys that already made it are there. I don't see a ton of emerging acts. I'm sure there are. Yeah. It's a cool town. I just I wore it out. So
You did your damage and moved on. I do want to kind of pick your brain on the idea of genre, because that's been in the zeitgeist right now, the conversation. And I want to be careful about this because it's kind of controversial, but about Beyonce winning like the album, the kind of her country album, right? I don't like boxes for artists. I don't like genre. I don't like limiting people in their creativity, but it seems a lot of people do in this industry. It's like, no, you're in this lane and you stay in that lane. You cannot come into our lane. And it bothers me as an artist who has done that. You have gone, country into the Southern rock and now the active rock, hard rock lane. How do you feel about genre and those boxes?
I don't know, and I get called Southern rock a lot, and I don't get offended by it, but I don't love it because I'm like, I'm not Southern at
Yeah.
all.
Right.
Like, I
Right.
know
Right.
Southern guys, and I love Southern rock, but I'm not a Southern guy. I'm about as Northern American, as it
Yeah.
gets, being from Northern
Yeah.
Montana. So it does feel like people have to be able to put things in a box, and the Grammy thing, I get both sides of it. Like, you need to let new people in, but I also saw an interesting post where Chris Stapleton's just wailing, and it's like, are you telling me you made a better record than Chris Stapleton did? Like, and it's kind of like a political thing too. Of like,
Yeah.
it's I don't know. It's so I get both sides of that. Of like, Chris Stapleton's the best artist of our generation, as far as I'm concerned, especially
Mhm.
out of Nashville. I'm pretty certain in 100 years, people will be playing his music from our time in music more so than any, and especially out of the Nashville thing. I'm like, that's the Waylon, that's the Chris Christopherson, that's the Johnny
Yes.
Cash, and his
Yeah.
name is Chris Stapleton, and the rest of these pop country guys will be forgotten.
That's the stuff I was raised on. And so yes, you're preaching to the choir on that one. I totally
Yeah.
agree. Yeah, I think it's good to let artists be creative, but I think it's very diplomatic what you said, and I do understand it from both sides. But I don't
Yeah,
like
they
to
need
put
to
artists
they
in
need to be
boxes.
better at letting new people in, but they
Yeah,
also need to like acknowledge the greats, So
I feel you. Yep.
Yeah, and that's the thing, Tim, is as Chess said, we love your hard rock sound, and it's so cool. Like, we're all around the same age, so we all have that grunge influence. We grew up on that grunge music, and your lyrics, as Chess also mentioned, just so authentic. You're showing your vulnerability, and I feel like maybe that's why it's hitting right now, because I feel like the world that we live in, it's kind of fake, because I feel like, with social media and stuff, a lot of people put their best of themselves out there. It's always like, look at me, look what I'm doing, the cool stuff. It's always the best version they put out there. So it does come off very fake for you. And I think that's why we're so attracted to your music. Do you feel like maybe that's why maybe you're hitting right now? It's just the timing of it all and people are just really connecting with you?
yeah, I think so. I think I look at what my kids listen to, and my
Mm-hmm.
13-year-old son. I just got him a Spotify account. He just texted me, and he's like, "Hey, Dad, I'm discovering these classics. Keyword classics:
Okay.
Nirvana and Rage Against the Machine, and I think I'm ready to start playing guitar."
Okay.
And we
Oh,
talked about this. We talked about this last night with the band, and this hit so hard because I'm like, "What is this rock resurgence?" And my band's like, is this a rock resurgence, or is this like us in high school listening to AC/DC and ZZ
Mm.
Top, where it all comes full circle, and now these
Yeah.
teenagers are discovering Nirvana and Rage. And my 16-year-old daughter's like, we're cranking Deftones, and I'm like, whoa, and Foo Fighters, and all of her girlfriends are just into
yeah.
that. And I'm like, maybe it is like how when we were kids, we had that resurgence of AC/DC and CCR and Van Halen that we went through high school with, even though it didn't come out when we were in high school. We found it in high school. I think it's just the full circle cycle, and there's not a lot of new guys writing and doing that kind of stuff. And so it's a pretty good time for me accidentally to fall in and be like, I'll be your Huckleberry. Call me Southern Rock one more time.
Yeah, exactly. No, we're gonna stop that right now for everybody. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's one more example of how you have been so lucky in the timing of your life. It was really, you were written in the stars. You've had such a wild ride. You posted something the other day I saw on Instagram, and I was like, need to hear that story. You said, I was today years old when I found out my dad died in prison in Yuma. What's that?
Yes.
I was like,
Yeah,
huh?
I get to go through life, and my mom doesn't like to tell me a lot of things, and I'm like,
Yeah.
hey, Mom, like at some point we should just sit and have this conversation, but she's not that person. So then
Okay.
Oh,
I
wow.
I get on 23andMe or Ancestry.com, and my wife said, "Careful what you wish for." Apparently, my dad is a traveling musician that had 19 kids. I was told he died in Vegas. He was a big drinker, that he drank himself to death, and that was kind of the bookend story. And then I went and met my niece in Kansas City, and she's like, "Actually, your dad died in Yuma," which I did find his death certificate. And she's like, "He was in prison." And I'm like, "Oh my God, my outlaw story just keeps getting more outlaw."
It's so fantastic.
Well, that's kind of like what Bill Burr and Billy Corgan just kind of
I
went through
know. I'm going
recently,
to find
right?
out that I'm related to them because allegedly my dad had 19 kids. And when I got a hold of one of my half brothers, he's like, "Are you the long haired bearded guitar player?" Because he's a musician. He was a saxophone player, fantastic musician, unfortunately, horrible alcoholic. But he's like, "Are you the musician that showed up at our house in Vegas with your guitar?" And I'm like, "When?" He's like, "Probably 90." And I was like, "Dude, I was 5." So he's like, "Yeah, there's another bearded, long-haired Tim, and we're all named Tim after our dad." And I'm like, so it literally is a Billy Corgan, Bill Burr story.
It is. Oh my God. I'm like, are you Bill Montana? What is happening right now? So
Right.
how many
It's
of the
so
19?
bizarre.
It is. How many of the 19 kids do you know? Or 18?
I know of about 4.
Okay.
So there's a
Wow.
lot. But there's also the last name Jennings in there, and I'm like, oh, please, Waylon and Shooter, be on that list.
That would make so much sense. It would make. Have you met? Do you know any of the Jennings family? Have you asked?
I
Have
know
you done
Shooter.
the
I
family tree?
interviewed Shooter for CMT once. We never had the Are We Related conversation, but yeah.
I think it's time. I think it's time to have that conversation.
Well, and Tim, just you mentioned your mom right there, and you finally had a chat about your past and whatnot. With your album, the latest album, Savage, that's out there now, and you open up about so much of your personal life. What was her reaction to kind of hearing these lyrics of you opening up from your perspective of what you went through growing up, and she was there at the same time experiencing, unfortunately, all this bad stuff the two of you are
Yeah,
going
she
through?
doesn't love it, if I'm being completely honest. She's
Okay.
the mom that's like, everything is awesome, and we've moved on, and
Yeah.
we're not going to talk
Yeah.
about that stuff anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, there's a lot of conversations with mom. Yeah, this is my trauma too. So I will
Yeah.
deal with it how I see fit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, so she's not one, and she's not a giant fan of the hard rock stuff, even though, she knew that's what I grew up listening to. We'd always
Okay.
fight about playing Nevermind in the car with her. Turn
Yeah.
that screaming stuff off. So,
I love that. My son is 8, and his favorite band is Iron Maiden, and we
oh,
saw
wow.
Judas Priest and Iron Maiden last year together, and it was such a cool moment in time. You're a daddy of 4. How do you balance it all on the road and doing everything that you do?
I try to just stay up with the kids all the time. And then this little girl just flew in. Say hi, Riv.
Hi.
She just
I
flew
love
Yeah.
her
in
mean face.
I didn't want to miss her birthday, so she flew in. Her birthday's tomorrow. So
Happy birthday. That's
she's
so
out
cool.
hanging out with dad and learning bad stuff from the band.
Yes.
And so I try to bring the kids out. And then my son Dalton will fly out to Seattle to see the Neptune show. And then I go home and try to do vacations and spend as much time with them as I can. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a
Yeah.
tall order, but it works, seems to.
Yeah. Yeah, you make it work. It is tough, and I don't envy you, and I know we don't want to take up too much of your time since you're sitting there with your family. Thank you for being with us, though.
Oh, you bet. Thanks
Yeah.
for having me.
This has been really cool, and you being out with Miles just makes so much sense. So we're excited to see what happens for you. We were telling Miles we've got to get you into San Francisco. We play on the
Yeah.
on Bone Breakers, and we want to make
Yeah.
sure that you're here. We got some great rooms, so we'll help make it
Awesome.
happen.
Yeah.
And
I
you're
do want to ask one more question of you. We always like to ask our rock stars this. We may have asked you at Aftershock, and we'll see if you remember or not. It's from the movie Almost Famous, and the question is, what do you love about music?
What do I love about music? Everything, but I'm trying to think of I don't know, able to capture an emotion. And I like that it it crosses languages and borders in a way that you know that nothing else can. You can't communicate with some lost tribe from back in time. If you play music, everyone can nod their head. It's this
It's so
universal
true.
language that I feel
Yeah.
breaks down borders and walls. And maybe when the aliens come to kill us, we can play them some cool songs and they'll spare our lives.
Yeah. And I don't want to speak on your behalf, but for you it seems like therapy.
Yeah, very much therapeutic. Yeah, and that's one of those things. Oh, you need to go to a counselor. I'm like, no, I'm gonna write this in a song. And my
Yeah.
counseling is when someone responds on the internet and says, "Oh my God, I went through that," and knowing you're not alone.
Yeah. I love all your wild songs, and I love that side of your personality, but I'm with everyone that tells you that. I love being able to connect with you through that vulnerability in your music. So thank you for doing what you do. Truly.
Oh, you bet. Thank you guys.
Yeah, so we encourage everyone, go see Tim Montana and Myles Kennedy. They're both going to be at the Ace of Spades in Sacramento next Tuesday.
The Good Guys Tour.
The Good Guys Tour, February 18th. Get your last minute tickets over livenation.com. Also check out Ace of Spades, sac.com. And of course, go check out Tim Montana's latest album, Savage, streaming everywhere. Check out timmontana.com to get some merch there as well. Tim, like we said, thank you so much for making the time and just being an awesome dude, man.
Yeah, thank you.
And
guys
my neighbor. My neighbor. I
in
can't
LA.
believe that. Wild. That's so crazy.
We got to send this to your brother.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are we related?
Yeah, we are.
Awesome, Tim. Thank you so much.
See you guys. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.